Welcome to the Vandal Insider Podcast, presented by Inland Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine Clinic of Moscow and Pullman. Let the team that takes care of the Vandals take care of you. Get the latest information on University of Idaho athletics you won't find anywhere else. It's all here on the Vandal Insider Podcast, every fan source for all things Idaho athletics. Here's your host, Dennis Patchin.
Welcome to a special edition of the Idaho Vandal Insider Podcast as we celebrate the life of Idaho Vandal coach Don Monson, a Hall of Famer at the university who passed away 3 weeks ago. Monson led the most successful era of Idaho basketball, winning 100 games in the university's history in a 5-year stint that included back-to-back trips to the NCAA tournament. His 1981-82 team at 27-3 has the best record in the University of Idaho basketball history. The team was ranked as high as number 6 in the country and made it to the Sweet 16. For current head coach Alex Pribble, Don Monson is what Idaho basketball is and should be.
Well, I think Don Monson is Idaho basketball. You know, the tradition that we talk about upholding, trying to return Idaho back to the glory days, all that is Coach Monson. I walk in the office every morning, and the first thing I see is a big picture of Coach Monson and a couple of his players on the wall. So, the pride in Idaho basketball, a lot of it is because of that coach and what he did. So we're very honored to be a part of Coach Monson's legacy.
Pribble remembers and cherishes his first meeting with Big Muns.
Yeah, it was incredible. Obviously I'd heard a lot about Coach Monson. You can't coach in the Pacific Northwest and not know who he is and kind of what he's meant to the game of basketball out here. So when I got the job, and it was actually my first football game, I was upstairs meeting a few people, and Coach Monson was there. So I had the privilege of sitting down and talking to him, and such a terrific guy. Spent a bunch of time just talking to me about the history of Idaho basketball, and it was really a meaningful experience for me. So got to meet him, and he came out to a basketball game as well, and it's just, it meant a ton. So it's great to actually have met him and go through and kind of understand what we're honoring here.
This Idaho Vandal Insider Podcast is presented by Inland Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine Clinic of Moscow and Pullman. As the Vandals team physician, orthopedic surgeon Dr. Matt Taylor cares for elite athletes, weekend warriors, and everyone in between. Let the team that takes care of the Vandals take care of you. I had a chance to sit down and talk with Dan Monson, Don's son, and college basketball coach in his own right. We got a chance to remember the coach, the man, and the dad.
You know what, I figured 10,000 of these interviews at least, and I struggled for the very first time to ask you the first question. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to ask, so I'm just going to ask, how do you think your dad would want him to be remembered?
Wow. I've done a lot of these interviews, and I don't know that I have the right answer for that, but I think Dad, the biggest thing was his character. I think he wanted to be remembered as a honest, hardworking guy. The accolades of winning games and everything wasn't who he was, but he was an ethical person that tried to do the right thing as a coach, as a dad, as a husband. I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but I think he enjoyed being labeled as old school. He's kind of just an old school with his ethics, with his coaching style, with his parenting. he was old school.
We know what your dad was as a coach and the success that he had at Idaho, but what was he like as a dad?
Better than a coach. He was good. It's funny because I haven't gotten emotional for this whole week because he lived such a great life. It's been such a celebration to hear all the stories and stuff, but to have to talk about it's the hardest thing. But we just connected, not just as father-son, but as people, I idolized him so much. We had the same interests, the same tastes in food, the same hobbies. He was just I have 2 sisters, but, I went to practice with him every day. And, as a kid, I just remember whistle would blow and I'd be diving for the ball on the other end, because don't bounce that ball when I'm talking, and but I would never miss a practice that I could go to if I didn't have school, and the yellow school bus picking me up in Cheney, at the elementary school or whatever, to take me to the game. He just included me in, pictures of me, my mom's digging up now of sitting on the bench with him crying after a loss and holding me at 10 years old, I grew up as, in his shadow, but in his realm of life.
When did you know your dad was a basketball coach? When did that feeling first hit you?
I think it was, in Pasco. I don't remember a lot of my days in Cheney. I think I was in kindergarten or first grade when we moved from Cheney to Pasco, and that's when I remember going to those practices, and that's the gym that I remember shooting so much in. I do remember the yellow school bus coming in Cheney to get me one time, but he was an icon in Pasco, not just because of a basketball coach, but back then he was fighting the racial wars of the Tri-Cities, and he was the first one to take the African American players in Pasco and take those kids and not just make them a good basketball team, but he still got, I heard from Ronnie Howard and Gordy Geis and guys, Mike Guajardo, guys that he coached 40, 50 years ago that are still, calling him, till last week when he passed.
When you get those phone calls, does it make you realize even more how big an impact your dad had on people's lives? I mean, I've heard people who were female students at Pasco and Cheney talk about him, not just as a basketball coach, but as an educator and all the things that he did at the schools.
Yeah, I think he got away with being so old school because it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter if you're black, white, his son, some guy he'd never met. He was going to be the same. It was going to be the same rules for everybody. It was going to be the same. He was a counselor. I remember he came back one day. I had to be little. This was in Pasco, so somewhere between kindergarten and ninth grade. I remember he come back and his front tooth was chipped. From at school that day, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "I was breaking up these two girls fighting, and they had back then the African American, had the picks, for their hair, and the girl swung a pick and got him in the mouth, and he's in the middle of all that, but he wasn't afraid to tell people what he thought and he had no filter. That's one of the great qualities that I'm not proud of, because I got that from him too. He had no filter. I mean, he told people what he thought. He didn't care what they thought about it. He was just very straight shooter, and I think the people that got to know him respected that. Whether he disciplined them or they didn't like what they heard from him, they respected his opinion because they knew he wasn't going to sugarcoat it.
How did things change for you and your family when you guys went to Michigan State?
Well, as kids, we were in awe because we go from Pasco, Washington to, I'm selling programs on the Red Sea River, whatever they call it, for Michigan State, Michigan football games. I'm selling programs and making $70 in 2 hours, and he comes with a courtesy car with a Camaro the first time he drives out, and yet as only he could do, we're living in married student housing, sneaking in a dog every night because we didn't have a house yet. So we thought as kids it was super cool. He didn't. I mean, he really struggled with it. He turned down a couple times, really, he loved Pasco. He loved what he did there. And Judd is a whole nother segment of, similar stories, but, they went back there and they fought like brothers every day in practice and the bench, and, 2 years of trying to get Michigan State turned around, which they obviously did. And, But as a kid, I mean, your dad's a college coach, when you come into a new environment like from Pasco to East Lansing, Michigan, it was really cool.
And you're part of, because he brought it home, I'm sure, every day, the recruitment of Magic Johnson. I mean, tell us a little bit about your dad that year trying to get Magic to come to Michigan State.
Well, back then the rules were so different. He went to every game, and probably 25 games, and I probably went to 15 of them with him because that's what I did. I just went with my dad wherever he went, so I saw all those games too. But I don't know how long this thing can be because we could go for hours. But one of my favorite stories is more of a Judd story. But they'd play 4-on-4 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so if there was 15 guys, Jerry Heathcote would be the 16th. But if there was 14 guys, I'd get to be the 16th. So one time I'm getting to play and I'm on the Skins team, and we're winning. Talk about feeling good about yourself. You're in the 9th, 10th grade, playing with these college players, and there's a guy comes in. I'd never seen him before, and he's got this big afro. He's got orange polyester pants on with a flowered shirt, and Adidas tennis shoes. And but he's about 6'8" and about 190 pounds. And so anyway, the guy, he comes over to me and he starts unbuttoning his flowered shirt and says, "Coach Heathcote says I'm in for you." So I'm hot. I'm winning. I know he's doesn't play for Michigan State. Well, I mean, how is Judd? Don't do me like that, So I'm over there, kind of, sulking, and Judd comes over and he says, "Dan, you see that guy I just put in for you?" I said, "Yeah." And he said his name's Irvin Johnson. He never called him Magic. He said his name's Irvin Johnson. He's the best player in the country. He said, and if your dad doesn't help us get him here, he's not going to be here either. So he said, but someday you're going to sit around, you're going to tell people stories about that I've subbed Irvin Johnson in for you in this game, so quit your pouting. And just walked away, and I tell that story to my team every year. It is such a great story. So quit your pouting.
Talk us about the relationship between your dad and Judd. I got to experience it after both of them retired, sitting in the back seat of a rental car, them bitching at me driving to a game because I wasn't going the right way or fast. But I mean, that relationship was not only was it a lifelong relationship, it was a dynamic relationship.
Yeah, you had to live it. You can't explain those two. They were. Remember the show that was Grumpy Old Men that came out?
Yeah.
They really epitomized that movie.
I said they were the two guys in the balcony in the Muppet Show. Is who those two guys were.
They fought every time, and they loved each other so much, but they were not compatible. I mean, they were both alpha dogs. They both had to be in control of the situation. They both had to drive the golf cart. They both had to keep score. They both had to tell each other, the rules. And I mean, golfing with them was just unbearable. Just one at a time. But yet they trusted each other with their lives, and they, I mean, he tried to. After the first year there, they fought so much and argue on the bench and that kind of thing that Dad took the Meade High School job for a night, and Dwight Poole was the AD or the guy in charge of it, and he came. He told Judd. He went in and said, "Hey, I'm going to coach Dan," because I was going to be a sophomore, junior. He said, "I'm going to go to Meade, and I want to coach my son, and I appreciate everything." Judd, "No, you're not." He said, "You ain't doing that." He goes, "That's embarrassing." He said, "You're not leaving Michigan State for Meade." He goes, "You came here, you had a commitment to me, and Judd just wouldn't let him do it. I think he came in and gave him $5,000 more, gave him up to like 20 grand, made him like the highest paid assistant in the Big Ten in 1978 or something. And so Dad's, he could never go against him now. I mean, he wouldn't, they would fight and argue, but, Judd told him something. He respected him so much that he came back and he said, "Well," told the family, "I guess we're not going."
I never knew that story, and if he takes the Meade High School job, he probably doesn't ever become the coach at the University of Idaho.
No. So then we go, the summer comes, and we're at Priest Lake, and I remember him on the payphone at Indian Indian Creek campground talking to Idaho, and so he says, I got to call. Actually, I'm sorry. Before the phone calls, with Idaho, Judd, when the day the job opens, he goes, now this is the one you got to go do. And Judd was the first one that called Idaho and said, this is the guy you got to hire. And that, I mean, again, he had to be in control of the situation, but Judd said, this is what you need to do. So he goes from telling me he can't do something to telling me he has to do something. So it wasn't, I can't do it without you here. It wasn't, you have to see it. It's like, you're my friend. You're not going to screw up your career, because you and I are not seeing eye to eye in our matchup zone,
That's amazing. I knew that Judd did push him towards that. The Meade story is just,
It was only about a month's difference. It was only about a month later after he told him he couldn't go to Meade that the Idaho job opened. Idaho job opened late, in the summer, and again it was just kind of really weird because back then we'd always, and that was one of the deals he had. Tells you what kind of a family man Dad was. Is at first he said, I'm not going because I assume Priest Lake and my family time in July is too valuable for me and my family. And Judd said, well, I'll give you the month of July off. I mean, who would say that to an assistant coach when you have at a Big Ten school? I mean, that's the most, back then was the recruiting month of the year, and we piled the dog in car and drove the station wagon across country because we couldn't afford plane tickets for everybody, and did that for 2 summers, and so it was, and so we're up there in the middle of nowhere without a telephone when that job came open, so he didn't know if he was even in the running or not, and then he ends up getting it.
He played at Idaho. He grew up in Idaho. He's an Idaho kid. He's a Coeur d'Alene kid. He's a University of Idaho graduate. I know he is very proud of that. When he was offered that job, what did that mean to him?
It was huge. I mean, because it was, he was only in Michigan State for 2 years. So 3 years earlier, he was a high school coach at Pasco High, and he thought he had the Spokane Community College or Spokane Falls, which one had basketball back then.
Both of them at that time had basketball.
But he thought he was going. He thought he had that job 2 or 3 times, and it went to people with college experience. So, he never dreamed that he would be, because he couldn't get into, he couldn't even get a junior college job, and so it went, in 3 years he went from Pasco, 2 years at East Lansing to Idaho, and Idaho was no great situation at that time. I mean, they had a great tradition, but it was of losing, and he came in there, and I remember him calling back after a Weber State game one time, saying, I don't know if I can do this, kid. I just don't know. It's got so far to go. But Donnie Newman willed, and my dad willed that program to change, and then Kellerman and Hobson and Herbert and those guys come in, and again, what he did during that time to take them to the Sweet 16. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. It's even crazier that he's not in the Big Sky Hall of Fame.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. And unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he will get in, or they need to get rid of the Hall of Fame if he's not in there. It doesn't make any sense. Let me ask you, you were a high school kid and then a college kid at the University of Idaho while this whole thing is going on. What was it like to be part of that ride as the guys you have described him, your idol, doing that?
Well, I wasn't just a student. I got to be on the inside because, I played football there my freshman year, and I played 3 whole kickoff teams, to get a letter, and I barely hit anybody on those. But when I tore my second ACL my freshman year, I was void of what to do at 3 o'clock, in my whole life, so I had to recalibrate, and I couldn't do it. I had to go to practice. So I went to his practices, every day then, and that's when I kind of got the coaching bug, because he would come by, and walk by in practice and go, what are you seeing? What are you seeing with our rebounding right now? Or are we as bad defensively as I think we are, or whatever? It was something negative for sure, But it got to be, and it was kind of really awkward and probably not very good, to be honest with you, when he got to Oregon and I'd come into town in college, and when I was still at Idaho, and the MAC court, the seats were me to you, and he'd be talking to me more than he was his assistants during games sometimes. But we really, bonded that way through coaching till the day he died. I was going through reading some of my text messages from the other yesterday, and he had a couple plays he'd sent me just last year, that he thought I should put in the playbook.
I know that he was incredibly proud of you as the college coach, but I also know that he was torn because he knew the struggles that it is to be a college coach.
Yeah.
Did he share those with you?
Oh yeah. He was adamant for me not to get into coaching. He just said, this is, and yet I saw all the pitfalls, because I was with him, when kids were sick and couldn't afford orange juice, and you have to take it over to them and go into these, rundown neighborhoods and these kids, and I saw all the things that coaching is really. People only see the 2 hours on the court, and then the other 22 hours where you're really just managing, more kids. Like you have, instead of a family of 3, you have a family of 15, and so he was. I was. Another long story, but I was a junior in an accounting or in a business class at the University of Idaho, and it was like right before the final, and the teacher started talking about your schedule for the next year, and it basically was I was going to be a junior, and there's no turning back now. It's all business classes. You're in your major, and I broke out in a cold sweat. I'll just never forget. I was sitting on the aisle in this theater room, and I'm like, I can't visualize doing everybody's taxes, I'm not going to be happy doing that. So I would go home for Sunday dinner, and Mom would do some laundry for me, and that's kind of a tradition we do with our boys now. And he's over there eating, and Dad, he wasn't a great etiquette eater. He was just taking the mashed potatoes, and they were going in, and he didn't have his head down. I said, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. He's like, don't interrupt this is a good meal. And he goes, what do you got? And I said, well, I want to be a coach. I don't want to do this accounting. And he didn't change expression, but he kept eating, didn't say a word. And then 3 or 4 bites later, says, you want to be a coach because I'm a coach, or you want to be a coach because you want to be a coach? I said, Dad, I don't think anything. I don't think I can wake up in the morning and be happy doing anything else. It's what I want to do. Doesn't say anything again. So I'm like, oh my God, here he comes, the Don Monson coming across the table at me. Gets up, still doesn't say anything. Gets up, comes around, gives me a big hug, and says, I just wanted to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, but you be a good coach.
I know how proud he was. I got to see him a couple of times in that Elite 8 run at Gonzaga, and what that meant to him. He had the look of a dad whose kid hit his first Little League home run, or a kid scored his first touchdown, or somebody comes home and brings an A home for the first time in a class that they've struggled in. That's the look, that's the feeling. We didn't say a lot of words. It was just that look, that happiness, and how proud he was. Yeah,
I always say my biggest regret on that Elite 8 team is it happened so early in my career. I didn't really understand what a unbelievable run that was. But to have him and Mom living in Spokane while that happened. But I also know too that he didn't love me any more or any less because of that.
No.
He was proud of me before I did that, and he was proud of me after that. I've had some really bad seasons since then too, and he was just as proud. So that's why he was just such a unique guy and a unique man, and he was really able to express that at the end, the last few years, from the Minnesota situation on. But early, he just never really, I don't think he wanted to blow my head up or any of that. He like you said, I knew he was proud, but he never really said much early in my career, because I think he thought I was get too cocky, and he didn't like cocky.
Always coaching, wasn't he? Even when he wasn't coaching.
Yeah.
I lost my dad more than 25 years ago, and there are certain times I always think of him or what he would do. When do you think that you'll think of your dad? What point of the day, at what point, in a basketball season, will you just kind of think about your dad and have him help you get you through the moment, even though he's not here?
I think it's going to be every day. There's a song from Zach Brown that it's called "Oh Man." It talks about idolizing your dad and wanting to be like him. And I looked at the date. It was September 11th, which is so odd. September 11th. What a day to have. And 2019, and I was riding to work, and I heard that song, and I pulled over. I was crying, thinking of him, and that's why when I put out his thing, that I put it out. I don't know how to do social media, but one of my kids put it out with that song because he just I just idolized everything about him, and I don't even remember what your question was, but
when would you think about your dad?
Oh, when I think about him, yeah. And so I played that song every day since he passed, and I hadn't even heard it. I just knew there was a song. That's why I was going back through my text messages. I knew there was a song I sent him, and he sent back, "Thanks for the meaningful text, your old man," and just as he would. But the first time he passed away on Wednesday, and we had our first scrimmage here at Eastern on Saturday, and with 19 seconds left in our scrimmage, it was a tie game. Our best scorer, leading player coming back, Andrew Cook, came down awkward on a spin lay-in and fractured his foot in 3 places, and it's gonna probably out for the year, and had surgery today. And the first thing I thought of was, I need to call Dad, because he could always get me through those kind of things.
Dan, we appreciate the time. Thanks for sharing the memories. I know that Idaho Vandal fans loved your dad for what he did on the court, but he was more than that. He was more than just a college basketball coach.
He was a Vandal through and through, and that, obviously, he always said blood's thicker than where you went to school. I'm going to root for Eastern while you're coaching. But when Mom was putting her obituary together, and she said, in lieu of flowers, they list things, I go, how do I get last seat in that Eastern basketball? And she goes, because your dad was never going to let people give to your Eastern before they're going to give to Idaho. So, and Idaho has been fantastic. I just read a letter from their team 20 minutes ago that Coach Pribble sent, and the amount that they've reached out during this, and I saw somebody sent me a picture of him on the scoreboard at the football game. The family really appreciates the love back that he gave them.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sitting down and sharing your dad with all of us, because he was a big part of a lot of people here in our area and certainly at the University of Idaho. Thanks for the chat.
Well, he loved you, Dennis, because and the reason why I know is because he gave you a lot of grief. And that's how he showed his affection.
Thanks.
All right, my man.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
A side note for you, I first met Coach Monson back in 1979. I interviewed him after a game where his team lost for the 7th straight time. He wasn't happy, and it showed. Even when he was winning, though, it was hard to tell if he was happy. But I got to know him much better later in life, after he retired from coaching, and I spent a lot of time with him in the 2 years that Dan was the head coach of Gonzaga. No one was prouder of his son than he was. But he was proud not for his son winning games, but for doing it the right way. When he coached, you didn't see him smile much, but the smile on his face couldn't be missed when talking about his family. If you knew Coach Monson, you'd be honored for the time you spent with him. I certainly was. But if you didn't know Coach Monson, all you had to know are 2 things. 1, he loved his family a lot. And 2, he loved being a Vandal. This Idaho Vandal Insider Podcast is presented by Inland Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine Clinic of Moscow and Pullman. When he's not caring for the Vandals as team physician, orthopedic surgeon Dr. Matt Taylor provides the same MVP orthopedic care to our entire region. At Inland Orthopedics, our team is your team. Thanks for listening to our celebration of the life of Idaho Vandal legend Don Monson. We'll see you next week for another edition of the Idaho Vandal Insider Podcast.
This has been the Vandal Insider Podcast, presented by Inland Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine Clinic of Moscow and Pullman. Let the team that takes care of the Vandals take care of you. Get the latest information on University of Idaho athletics you won't find anywhere else with the Vandal Insider Podcast. From in-depth conversations to game previews, the Vandal Insider is every fan's source for all things Idaho athletics.